Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Pencil, SoundCloud, SoundClick. It's your boy Tone 202. And this is my second edition of the Holy Wars between the Jews and the Romans. And I got a couple comments on it. I didn't get a lot of views, but I got some comments on it. And I got some people who appreciated, history. And I want to just say that I am not a aficionado on history, and there's a lot on the internet that you can find out about it. But here's the main struggle. Okay, the holy city, the city of Christ, Jerusalem. For one, let's look at where Jerusalem is. They call us African Americans, and it's so wrong that they call us African Americans or Afro Americans for a few reasons. One, the origin of where we're from, which is all built up in a lie. And two, Afro American. How are you going to call me by the contents of my hair? So when you look at white people, do you go since my hair is in an afro form and not its color, do you go stringy hair Americans? I mean, how do you call that? How do you do that? So it's just all messed up. And then as far as African American, it's like, for one, Africa was named after a white dude, Africanus, some French dude, who went over there with a bunch of other people and split up all of Africa, divided it up, and they conquered it with the help of Africans. You got to understand, when white people went over there, sailed over there, and took us with ships, they had the help of the actual people who lived there. They didn't just, up jump and boom, 20 million people were taken off of the shores. They had help. And it was all trade. It was all money involved. So, you don't get 1.5 million people off of the Ivory Coast just by going over there and just sieging the whole country. And then as far as who we are, okay, so when you look at Africa in itself, for one, Africa was not named Africa. It was originally named the land of Ham. So, and then when people say you're African, it's just like, okay, where did I come from in Africa? And there lies the mystery. So then you have the whole people who saying that they're Jews. And then you have the Jewish. So, okay, so when you look at the Jews and the Jewish, the Jews are the black people, me, who are so-called African American. They did not even come from Africa. Jerusalem is not in Africa. Jerusalem is in Asia. So when you look at that, then you have Jerusalem, and then you have the continent of Africa. And when you look at it now, and you look at it 2,000 years ago, you'll notice that, of course, the land is more divided. But you'll notice that what's in between it is the Red Sea. And then you have the Caucasus Mountains. And the Caucasus, when you look in the book of Deuteronomy, and you will see how the people, the Jewish people, how when they came out of Egypt and they were set free by Moses, they went into, and now some people can correct me on this, but this is just going off of memory. So when they set free by Moses, by God using Moses, they came out of Egypt, which is in Africa. And this was after they were already taken over in 70 AD by the Romans. In Jerusalem. Jerusalem was conquered then. And you got to look at the people who were the Romans, the Idumeans. And the Idumeans are also known as Caucasoids, which are white people who came from where? The Caucasus Mountains. So all that action happened in between Asia and Africa. But the original black people who came out of Jerusalem are now what we consider, or what they call us, African American. We are not African American. That is two lies. We are Jews. We came out of Jerusalem and we were conquered in 70 AD by, I think, was Scipio? Was it Scipio who conquered? I think it was General Scipio. But nonetheless, when you read the story of what happened, when the Romans came and conquered Jerusalem, said this is all going off from memory. When they came and conquered Jerusalem, of course there was a major fight. But once they got in to Jerusalem, they committed all kind of atrocities, and then you had like 1.5 million Jews fled out of Jerusalem. Well, when they fled, they crossed into Egypt, I believe, and they crossed into Egypt, and they were soon put in captivity again. Now, all this happened because of sin. This happened simply because, you have okay. This happened because we were punished for not obeying God's laws. That's basically what happened. We started to look at other gods. When you look in the Bible, you'll see that there are all type of other gods that were there. You'll see that the god Moloch was there. When you look in, get on back. You look at the god Moloch. You look at even after we came out of Egypt, out of captivity in Egypt, when we were doing the whole 40-year thing, we still worshiped those other gods. When Moses went up into the mountains and Aaron was leading us and people started complaining, but Aaron gave in to what the people were saying, and then they built a calf, and I forgot what the calf was, but they built a calf, and it was made out of gold or whatever, and people started, wow, my God, have mercy. People started worshiping. That was us. People started worshiping the calf, and then God sent snakes on them. God even opened up the ground, and like 250,000 of them were lost in like one time. So there's all kind of backstory to that. But if you look at, all right, you better chill. You better chill. If you look at the Bible, you can read a lot of this, and when you look at history, you can see a lot of this. So once Rome took over our homeland, then the Middle Eastern people came in and filled those spots. And when you look at the book of Revelations, it talks about how they built synagogues on top of churches. You have to go into Revelations and look at that. Well, those people who built synagogues, they did not worship Jesus Christ and see him as the Son of God. What they did was they believed in Muhammad. And then when you look at the story of Muhammad, because I used to go downtown and talk to people who were African Muslim people and talk to them, basically what Muhammad, what Muhammad did was he took basically, to me, he took a story that's out of the Bible and he used those words to influence people not to worship Christ. This is what it looks like to me. But basically, the story of Muhammad is Gabriel, the angel, came and hugged him, and while he was hugging him, he started spitting out the Bible. But it's really something, because the Bible, the Quran that they now read was made up 500 years after the actual Bible was written. So it's just like, wait a minute, how did that happen? And then when you read the Quran and you read the Bible, they're eerily similar. And I'm like, well, what? And then when you read how many disciples there weren't 12 disciples, there were 70 disciples. And then you read the Quran, and he had 70 disciples write down all of what he had said, because Muhammad was supposed to be illiterate. And it's just like, so that story gets real confusing. There's some other things about Muhammad, but I'm not going to speak ill. But nonetheless, so you guys can get all off into that. But nonetheless, those people who are of Arab nations came in, and they came in and they went into Jerusalem and basically built synagogues, so on and so forth. And they called them the synagogues of Satan, if you look at the book of Revelations. So now you have Idumeans, who are Caucasoids or Caucasians who are, I'm sorry, this is long, who are in Jerusalem and making claim to it. And you also have Arab nations who are in Jerusalem and making claim to it, while the people who actually built Jerusalem, the seed of David and, Lion of Judah and all that, are no longer there. Those people are no longer there. So those people went, like I said, went into Egypt, and then after Egypt, they went to, I believe, the land of Canaan, the Promised Land. I don't know. Somebody kind of correct me on that. But nonetheless, and after that, they were pretty much sold into slavery by the actual African people. So you have the people who are the Egyptians. They were also dark-skinned people. And when you look in the Bible, and it says that Christ fled, when Christ was fleeing, he fled into Africa. And the reason why he fled into Africa is because he knew that he looked like them. He was a dark-skinned man. He looked like them. So we are not Africans. We are actually Asians. I know that's going to bump some people's head, but if you follow the storyline and you look at history, the so-called African American people are not African at all. We're Asians. If you notice that African and African American people, although most of the time we get along, we try to get along, but, well, let me correct that. We try to get along, but most of the time we don't. And when I say get along, meaning we can live beside each other, but when it comes to intermingling with each other, you don't find a lot of that. Their traditions are way different than ours. Uh, they're just different than us. And at one time, we were at war with them. And those wars spanned over, decades, centuries, and, so on and so forth. So, I mean, I am not enemy with any of them. One of my neighbors, he has an African family, and they're cool people. They're great people. But nonetheless, as far as intermingling and marrying each other, it doesn't happen as often as you think it would if we were all from the same tribe. But we are not all from the same tribe. And when you say African, it's just like, okay, Africa is a continental landmass. There are different countries in Africa. Okay, so you have different countries, you have different tribes in Africa. So there's that. Nonetheless, I am not enemies with any of them. But so I just wanted to talk more on the Holy Wars and who is what. And on my next video, I'll say more about it on what I can remember.